Huey Pearson, what is the origin of the title of your book, The Shadow of the Panther?
It originates out of my determination to find a good title to catch the attention of publishing houses when I came with the proposal. And also, well, you know, that's one part. The other part is I wanted to explain, you know, the nature of what I wanted to do. It was like the shadow of the Panther. What kind of legacy did the Black Panther Party leave America with in general, and Black America with in particular? And I thought that it would be a good title to use to convey what I was trying to say about the Black Panther Party. So
that picture on the cover is of Huey Newton, and
yeah.
the subtitle here is Huey Newton and the Price of Black Power in America. Who was Huey Newton?
Huey Newton. Huey Newton was he's called the co-founder, but he was actually the founder and driving force behind the Black Panther Party. He founded the party in the fall of 1966. He and Bobby Seale actually founded the party, but Bobby Seale was more public relations, a person along with Eldridge Cleaver. And Newton was really the driving force, the real power behind everything. I think that the Black Panther Party is an organization that, without question, it got its start kind of coming out of what had been started by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I think the Huey Newton is definitely a person who had two sides, as I point out in the book. The one side of him was a criminal, kind of, you know, very criminal from the very beginning, petty criminal, and then he became much more serious later on. But the other side was he was an intellectual. Something that I think you don't see, a combination you don't see too often in African-American men anymore. It would almost be like Tupac Shakur, a person who was in the news for a while, you know, as engaging in all sorts of outrageous activities along with his rap. Someone like Tupac who could quote the philosophers and writers from all over the world, and also speak English properly. Huey Newton was very much a person like that, but who at the same time could go down on the streets and get in a fight and beat up anybody that practically anyone he could come across, or engage in criminality with anyone he came across.
Did you write that Tupac Shakur's mother was a Black Panther?
I didn't write that, but yes, his mother was a Black Panther. I think I did refer to her in the book. Yeah, I referred to her because she was in the New York chapter of the Black Panthers. So yeah, he is one of the young people who speaks of the Black Panthers almost as icons. So yeah, she was in the party, but I don't spend much attention on her. I just spend like a sentence or two on her.
Where was Huey Newton from?
He was from Oakland, California. His family originally came from Monroe, Louisiana. He was named after Huey Long because, as a lot of people who know anything about Southern politics and Louisiana politics know, Long was a very popular populist governor who was very different from most of the Southern governors of the 1920s and 30s. And he was a governor and then a senator. Most of the Southern politicians in that era engaged in race-baiting politics. And though a case can easily be made that Huey Long was a racist, he did not engage in race-baiting politics. He was very populist in his nature, and he had this, the whole notion of every man a king. So a lot of blacks in Louisiana had a respect for that, and Huey Newton's father, Walter Newton, out of respect for what Long was trying to accomplish for all poor people in Louisiana, decided to name his son Huey as well. You know, so that's how Huey got his name.
Right on the flap, the opening flap of this book, you talk about August 22nd, 1989. Mm-hmm. What happened?
August 22nd, 1989 was the day that Huey Newton approached. He went to West Oakland. He'd grown up all over Oakland, and by this time we're talking about a Newton who he'd been in jail. He had come out of jail for a shooting of a police officer in Oakland. And it was while he was in jail that the Black Panther Party became the national party that everybody remembers, because he professed that he did not kill this officer. And we have to understand that this is 1967, the fall of 1967. You had a number of different groups who saw the police as their enemies. You had the anti-war, young whites and anti-war movement, and you had young black militants, both of whom said, well, the police are our enemy. And they kind of latched on to Huey Newton as a hero for being accused of shooting this police officer. So Huey Newton became this icon that everybody looked up to. And when he came out of jail, on a technicality in 1970, because he had been convicted of manslaughter, when he came out of jail, he was a person that was celebrated by radicals everywhere. I mean, it was the thing to have your anti-war button on the one hand, Free Huey button on the other, or if you were black, a young black person, your Black Power button, and along with that, your Free Huey button. So Huey came out of that and came into a celebrity world of limousine liberals, of Hollywood liberals who kind of latched on to him. But at the same time, he developed a very heavy drug addiction. Now, he had always been, he had been a petty criminal, and by petty criminal, I mean a person who engaged in short change scams in Oakland. He had done that while he was in high school and on up into his early 20s. But then when he came out, and became a person who was an icon of the beautiful people, he became heavily addicted to cocaine. He had tried drugs before, but he did not become addicted anywhere near to the extent he became addicted in 1970 when he came out of prison. And he became a virtual monster in a lot of ways. I mean, he just, the side of Huey Newton that could engage in evil activity, it just accelerated because cocaine makes a person very paranoid. He engaged in a lot of sexual abuse. He engaged in the ordering the murder of people within the party, and in the cases of some people outside the party.
Just let me interrupt to ask you, how do you know all this?
Because out of talking to people who were actually in the party, and out of going over court records and uncovering the evidence that he actually engaged in this. There's plenty of evidence around that Huey Newton did. He was accused and charged with plenty of killings, and accused and charged with embezzling money from a school that the Black Panthers had. How
many times was he convicted of something?
He was convicted. Okay, he was convicted in 1967. He was convicted as well of stabbing Odell Lee in 1964. This was a misdemeanor conviction. He was convicted of a very minor charge in about 1987, 88. So he was convicted of something probably about 3-4 times. So he was charged with a number of different things. And
did he go to jail every time?
No, he didn't go to jail every time. He was out on bail for long periods of time. When he came out of jail in 1970 on the manslaughter conviction and shooting the Oakland police officer, and he was tried 2 times over again, and the trials resulted in hung jury, so the case was dismissed.
Go back to the August 22nd, 1989.
Okay, August 22nd, 1989, Huey Newton had come out of jail on a misdemeanor charge, drug possession charge. By this time, we're talking about a man who's very much addicted to cocaine. His organization no longer exists. You know, the Black Panthers were practically defunct by 1982. And he's heavily addicted to crack cocaine. So he goes to West Oakland on this particular night that you're speaking of. And he tries to get some more cocaine, because what he's doing is he's not paying for the crack cocaine the way most customers pay. And he's pressuring drug dealers to give him drugs, because, you know, I'm Huey Newton's basically his whole thing is like, I'm Huey Newton. I used to be king of the streets. You have to pay respect to me because of who I am. So drug dealers are giving him money, but it's a very complex thing. There's organizations who are running drugs on the streets of Oakland, and one organization is the Black Guerrilla Family, which is prison-based. Now, there are Black Panthers who became part of the Black Guerrilla Family while they were in prison, because there are a number of people who were in the Black Panther Party who ended up going to prison. Huey Newton, there's a lot of anger against Huey Newton because of him abandoning these Panthers while they were in prison, and no longer allowing the Panther Party to take care of them and their families to the extent that they did before he got out of prison in 1970. So you have a lot of residual anger in the BGF resulting from that, as well as the fact that he's taking drugs from these guys without paying. So a contract is put out on the life of Huey Newton, and on this particular August night, a young man Tyrone Robinson, decides to take up the contract because he thinks he's going to move up in the organization. And on that night, he puts 3 bullets in the head of Huey Newton, and Huey Newton dies.
How do you know that Tyrone Robinson did it?
Well, he was charged with the killing. He was convicted of second-degree murder. I went to the trial. I interviewed the Willie Payne, who was actually with Huey Newton before he died. As a matter of fact, Huey Newton crossed paths with Willie Payne the night that he died, and decided to get the cocaine and come back to Willie Payne's apartment and smoke the cocaine. I mean, yeah, the crack cocaine.
Did you talk to Tyrone Robinson?
I didn't. I tried to talk to Tyrone Robinson, but I didn't get a chance to talk to Tyrone Robinson. All I did was hear his testimony and also go in court and also go through the court records. And because there's a lot of, there were different police reports and everything that as well as what I could glean from Willie Payne to reconstruct everything.
Did you go to the funeral of Huey Newton?
I didn't go to the funeral of Huey Newton because I came to Oakland. Let's see, he died in August, and I came to the Bay Area in November, so I didn't get a chance to go to the funeral.
What was your reason for going to the Bay Area?
I came to the Bay Area because I had a tentative offer from Robert Maynard, who publisher of the Oakland Tribune, to write for the Oakland Tribune. I say tentative only because he said, well, as soon as I can open something up, I'd like to have you on my staff. So I was freelancing in New York City. I didn't have anything solid in New York City because everyone was telling me at the major papers, well, you have to pay your dues, you have to go out and leave New York and come and work your way back. So I thought Bob Maynard's tentative offer was the best offer that I had, so I decided to come to the Bay Area and wing it, go out to the Bay Area. And at the same time, the Panthers, since my birth name is Huey, the Panthers had kind of left my mind from my childhood, because in my childhood I had read practically everything I could get my hands on about the Panthers. So when Huey was killed in August, I was like, well, my goodness, what happened to this guy? What happened to the Black Panther Party? I want to investigate what happened to the Black Panther Party, as well as pursue this newspaper opportunity in the Bay Area. So that's what brought me to the Bay Area.
Did you ever think at any time in your life you wanted to be a Black Panther?
When I would say when I was about 10, well, I would say more 11 or 12 years old, during the heyday of the Black Panther Party, yeah, I thought, it would be great to be a Black Panther, because most of the media, particularly the media in the leftist community and the liberal community, most of the media gave you the impression that the Panthers were really great guys who were coming up with community programs, and that any kind of problems they were having with the police was because they were trying to do something good. So yeah, I was very much into the Black Power movement, Black Power era, when I was 11, 12, 13 years old.
Did you have to be black to be a member?
Yeah, for the most part, you did have to be black to be a member, but a lot of people don't realize that the Black Panthers were different than black nationalists. The Black Panthers believed that the system was at fault for the problems of black people and poor people in general. They had a lot of white allies, and that's one of the reasons I think a lot of the white radical movements like the SDS, the Weather Underground, the Peace and Freedom Party, they created alliances with the Panther Party because the Panthers said, well, we believe that this is the system that's wrong and not white people in general. That is opposed to what happened in SNCC. Now, SNCC started out as an integrated organization, but eventually the leadership in SNCC decided to kick the whites out of the organization, and you had a number of different black militant groups that didn't want to work with whites.
Got some pictures in there of some people my era that will be very familiar, and you mentioned SNCC, and I wanted to hold this picture up right here of Stokely Carmichael. What is SNCC, and what did he have to do with it?
Okay, well, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was an organization that really, for the most part, started out as the youth branch of Martin Luther King's civil rights movement. As everyone is quite familiar with the story, 1955 was the year when most people chart the beginning of the actual nonviolent resistance to segregation, the movement in which blacks, decided, well, we're going to put our foot down, we're not going to stand for this anymore. And then you had a lot of young people like John Lewis, Bob Moses, James Foreman, and the like, who decided, well, we want to do something as well. So it started out very much in alliance with Martin Luther King, and eventually started veering away from King, engaging in tactics that were more daring than what King and his disciples really wanted them to engage in. So eventually, it started out that way. You had the Freedom Rides, which basically were started by CORE, but which were assisted by people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It went from there, went to voter registration projects, and it started out as an integrated movement. And Stokely Carmichael joined the movement early on, and basically he went into Mississippi, he went to Alabama, he was part of the Freedom Rides, and he became more and more militant. Now you had other people in SNCC, people like Bob Moses and John Lewis, who didn't become as militant as Stokely Carmichael eventually became, but he became more militant and steered SNCC towards a militant direction.
John Lewis, the congressman from Atlanta.
Right, the current congressman from Atlanta.
Go back to Stokely Carmichael for a moment. Where is he today?
Stokely Carmichael's in Africa right now. He was in, I believe he was in Ghana for a while, but right now, I'm forgetting the particular country, but it's in West Africa, I believe, where he is right now. Yeah, I think it's Guinea. Yeah.
There's a hyphen to it. I don't know.
Guinea-Bissau, I believe it is. Yeah.
But he started Black Power, the phrase Black Power. What does that mean?
He and some of his disciples started.
What does that mean?
Basically, it was. It grew out of SNCC's dissatisfaction with what had gone on in 1964 at the Democratic National Convention. That SNCC, in alliance with some people in Mississippi who created the Mississippi Freedom Party, went to the Democratic National Convention having registered anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 black voters and said, well, look, we are the true representatives who should be sitting and representing the state of Mississippi at the convention. And Lyndon Johnson said, well, look, I need the South. I can't handle this right now. We'll give you 2 seats at the convention. He dispatched Humphrey to tell him, we'll give you 2 seats. They wouldn't accept that. So they went. The following year, they went to Alabama to register voters in a third-party effort, and they came up with the notion of Black Power as a means to campaign and get black people to see we need to empower ourselves. Now, eventually, they became, because they didn't elect anybody in this third-party effort, the effort through which they came up with the symbol of the Black Panther, and the reason they came up with the symbol was because you had a lot of illiterate blacks, and they decided, well, we have to figure out a way for these black people to recognize our ballot. So we're going to come up with the symbol of the Black Panther. So you had the Black Power, the notion of Black Power, the philosophy of Black Power, the symbol of the Black Panther that was what was initially used to register poor blacks in the Black Belt in Alabama, in Lowndes County. And that eventually, after the electoral efforts did not result in anyone being elected, then it was carried north, and it became the notion of Black Power, empowering ourselves by any means necessary, even if it meant taking up the gun.
Where's your hometown originally?
Grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
How long did you live there?
For 17 years. Let's see, that's 17 and a half years.
Parents, what did they do?
My father's a physician. He's still a physician. He's 73 years old. He had his own private practice. Now he's the medical director of a hospital in Fort Wayne. He originally came from Georgia. As a matter of fact, he settled in Fort Wayne only a few weeks before I was born.
Your mother?
My mother died when I was 17. She had a terminal illness for 8.5 years. So she was originally from Florida, and she met my father when he was in medical school, and she was a nurse at Meharry Medical College in Nashville.
What's your father's politics?
I would say my father could be classified as conservative. You know, a lot of people talk about the blacks who are conservative, and I would say he could probably be classified as conservative. I mean, a very self-reliant man who taught his kids to believe in themselves, that they could do anything they wanted to do. They were as good as anybody else. But my father's not the kind of person who had who would voice any kind of support for something like the Black Power movement.
Brothers, sisters?
I have 2 sisters, one older and one younger. Actually 3 now, because I have a little 8-year-old sister from my father's 3rd marriage.
Where are your sisters?
Both of them are in Atlanta, in the Atlanta area, in suburban Atlanta.
What was it like growing up in Fort Wayne, Indiana?
Well, it was interesting. I think, as a matter of fact, I was thinking about this a few weeks ago. Indiana is basically seen as a pretty conservative state, and I think that politically that's pretty dead on. But growing up in Fort Wayne, I grew up in a small middle-class black enclave, and I went to predominantly white schools from nursery school on up. And you know, there was some racial tension, but for the most part, there wasn't a whole lot of racial tension in junior high, you know, in elementary school, junior high, and high school. And I basically, well, first when I was in elementary school, I didn't do that well, only because I was into the Black Power movement, and some of the guys I grew up with, we all got this notion in our head that to do our schoolwork was becoming like white people, so we didn't want to do our schoolwork. So actually, after I fell out of that in junior high school by reading David Halberstam's book, The Best and the Brightest, and I started doing well in school, I was basically accepted by all the other students who did well in school. Now, there were a handful of black students in my school who did well, and you know, of course, you had your minority of white students, you know, the cream of the crop of the white students who did well, and they basically accepted me as their peer, as a person who was very intelligent. And interestingly, it wasn't until I got to Brown University in Rhode Island that I even came across the notion that I might be inferior because I was black, because you had the affirmative action program. And a lot of whites felt, well, the only reason blacks are here is because affirmative action is giving them a leg up. So I would say growing up in Fort Wayne, you know, there's a lot of the cliches around the conservative Midwestern values, optimistic Midwestern values. And I think that for the most part, those values, it's true. I mean, there might not be the worldliness you'll find on the East or the West Coast, but those values, I think there is something to this notion of basic Midwestern values that I think that I was brought up with. And my notion that please don't, you know, tell me, be straight with me and don't give me a lot of crap. So I think I grew up with that.
Go back to the David Halberstam book. The Best and the Brightest was about...
It was about Lyndon Johnson and the Vietnam War, actually Kennedy, Johnson, and the Vietnam War, and how the United States became involved in the war, and all of the advisors that were part of that.
And how did that impact you?
It impacted me very much because you had people like McGeorge Bundy, who was very intelligent. I mean, of course, Johnson himself didn't go to a prestigious college, but practically everyone he surrounded himself with, and Kennedy as well. Of course, a lot of the people that Johnson surrounded himself with were carryovers from the Kennedy administration, at least initially. But McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, and people like that had gone to very prestigious schools. And for some reason, the way Halberstam wrote this book, these men were very fascinating to me, and I thought, well, you know, gee, you know, I would like to do something similar to what these men are doing. Not that I was interested in engaging in Vietnam War policy, but just the way the book was written, it made it sound like they had very fascinating minds, and I really latched on to that, and the idea that you know, that it would be really great to go to a major, very prestigious school, an Ivy League school. So in about the 9th grade, I started investigating schools, and I bought a book. I think it was the Insider's Guide to the Colleges. And I just started like going through the Insider's Guide and seeing, well, what the different programs at different colleges were all about. And Brown University sounded like it had a very interesting program, a very liberal program that allowed you to take you know, whatever courses you wanted to take, but also you know, it was very creative, and it just sounded like a really good program. So Brown was a school I said, oh, I'm definitely going to apply to this school, you know, and a couple other schools.
You mentioned before that it wasn't the end thing to be, before Black Power, to be a good student or to be known as a bright student?
Well, it was interesting. In my particular neighborhood, like it's kind of hard to explain. It was a middle-class black neighborhood, but the people who I grew up with, their families were middle class because their parents had good factory jobs for the most part. You had a couple people whose parents were teachers, school teachers, but most everyone else, their parents had good factory jobs, because we're talking about a time in the Midwest where you had industrial cities in the Midwest where a lot of blacks could leave the South, come to the Midwest, and get very good jobs, making what today would be equivalent of $45,000 a year working in a factory. So those are the kind of kids I grew up with. And my father was the only one in the community who was a physician. Now, there were other black physicians in Fort Wayne, but none of them lived in black communities. We were the only one who lived in black community. So many of the students, most of the kids I grew up with, basically, you know, there are a few of us who had this notion about black power, but we all, for the most part, had this idea about that there was a certain way to be black. We didn't have the idea to the extent that the kids in the inner city part of Fort Wayne had it, because they basically thought of us, you know, the folks in the inner city, the blacks in the inner city, basically thought of those of us in my community, which was called Southern Heights. They basically thought of us as set apart from them because we lived in nice, modest houses. But for the most part, what still existed among the people in Southern Heights was the notion that there was a certain way to be black, and it wasn't a notion that really accepted being intellectual. So it wasn't until I got into the latter part of junior high school, probably 9th, 10th grade, that I started, like, you know, veering away from that. Me and a handful of other black students, including my sister and maybe 3 or 4 others, we started veering away from that idea and deciding, well, we're going to do well in school no matter what.
What did you study at Brown?
I studied a variety of different things because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. For a while I wanted to be a lawyer. At first I came in wanting to be a writer because I had won a major high school writing award and was the only one in northeastern Indiana to win it, an award called the National Council of Teachers of English Achievement Award in Writing. But I saw my first article published in a student newspaper at Brown. It didn't look like I had even written it, so that kind of turned me off to journalism.
Why didn't it look like you had written it?
Because the editor had edited it so heavily. So I was like, you know, well, gee, if this is what it's all about, I don't want to go into this. So I didn't. I just had the idea that this is something that I might not want to do. And so from there, I thought about being a lawyer. So I took, some social science courses. And then eventually I found my way into pre-med, not so much because I loved the sciences, but because I thought, well, looking back on my father's life and the fact that he was independent and very, very well respected, I wanted to do something where I could have an impact on people's lives and could be independent and make a decent living, more than a decent living, but comfortable living. So I went into pre-med. I guess I really started going into it hard in my junior year at Brown. And actually, I took an extra year. I graduated from Brown on time, but I took an extra year between finishing Brown and going on to medical school and finished up my pre-med. And then majored in biomedical ethics, which was an interdisciplinary major at Brown.
So did you get a medical degree?
I know I did. I spent 2 years in medical school and left because I figured that eventually I figured I wasn't going to become a good doctor. My studies, I just lost an interest in the science of medicine. I was doing all sorts of things at Meharry Medical College. I was public relations director for the student health fair. I was co-editor of the student newspaper. I was getting involved in a lot of political issues at Meharry and spending less and less time on my medical studies. And I just decided, well, I'm not going to be a good doctor, so I decided to leave.
Where do you live now?
I live in New York City.
Doing what? I'm
an editor and writer for Pacific News Service. I've written articles. There's been like the New York Times, Newsday, a variety of different things. For the most part, the last couple of months, I've been out promoting the book, and so I've been writing freelance for for other publications as well as doing stuff for Pacific News Service.
How many? By the way, how many Panthers were there at the height of the movement?
There's the estimates for the total number of Black Panthers vary. Now, some people say there was a couple of thousand at the height of the movement. Now, it's hard to get an exact figure because the Panthers were a national phenomenon roughly from 1968 to 1971. They developed chapters after Huey Newton was accused of shooting the police officer in Oakland. They became an overnight sensation for blacks around the country, particularly blacks, low-income blacks. So chapters started sprouting up around the country. And it's hard to get an exact number on it. Some people say there were as many as 5,000 at the height. Some people, the lower estimate goes down to about 1,500 to 2,000.
On page 209 of your book, you say that celebrities such as Harry Belafonte, Dick Gregory, Donald and Shirley Sutherland, Otto Preminger, Angie Dickinson, Jane Fonda, and others contributed to the Black Panther cause. Why and what was their cause?
Well, the cause was one of it's kind of a two-pronged thing. The notion that taking up arms against the establishment. Again, like I said, I was saying a little bit earlier, this was a very common notion back in 67, 68, 69, that the establishment was wrong and something needed to be done about the establishment. You had to overthrow the establishment. And the Black Panthers were more or less seen as the vanguard among people who decided we needed to take up arms. And because Huey Newton said, look, pick up the gun. We have to pick up the gun. So you had a lot of people, like the people you just named, who basically had the idea something does need to be done about the establishment. So you had, on the one hand, that was going through the minds of a lot of people. And on the other hand, the Panthers had come up with community programs. By 1969, they were running free breakfast programs, school programs, things of that nature, very grassroots programs. Also, free clothing, free shoe programs. Things of a very grassroots nature.
Where did they get the money?
They got the money from donations from Huey, Newton, and the Panthers. They basically had a lot of friends in Hollywood, friends in New York, who gave the money to the party. Like like Leonard Bernstein would throw. There's that very famous party that Bernstein threw, where they got donations from people of that nature.
Let me read this quote. It's from Jane Fonda. Revolution is an act of love. We are the children of revolution, born to be rebels. It runs in our blood. She called the Black Panthers, quote, our revolutionary vanguard. We must support them with love, money, propaganda, and risk. What year did she say that?
If I remember correctly, she said it in about 1970.
Did you ever try to reach her and see if she would say the same thing today?
No, I didn't try to reach her to see if she would say the same thing. There were a number of different people I wanted to reach, but Fonda, the main reason I didn't try to reach Fonda because I thought I would have to go through too many layers to reach her, because I figured she's such a celebrity, particularly since she's married to Ted Turner now. I figured, why spend time trying to reach someone like that when I can just look at what she said back then and tell readers what she said back then.
What was the point of quoting her here?
Well, to let people know that, someone like Jane Fonda, who basically is seen as very well-respected actress. She has a history of having supported causes that people might not remember that she supported. Now, which isn't to say that someone should see her as anathema because she did that, but to give readers a notion of the breadth of support the Black Panthers had at one time. One of the things that I think that a lot of people who've been reviewing my book have not made potential readers aware of is that the first 100 pages or so of the book, I don't even talk about the Black Panthers. I talk about the history of the civil rights movement, not even going back to the 50s, but going back to the 20s. And then I bring readers up through the involvement of young whites, because all of the white student activism of the 60s came out of the civil rights movement in the South. I mean, you had white students coming from the West Coast and the North going to the South, particularly during Mississippi Freedom Summer, and then coming, after engaging in Mississippi Freedom Summer, coming back to their campuses and engaging in student activism. And after they were basically, for all intents and purposes, kicked out of the civil rights movement by black militants, then they started putting their energy into the anti-war movement. So I'm basically trying to show people how celebrities that we see as icons for the most part today were also part of this movement. And I think that a lot of people should be made aware of the fact that it was only at a certain point in the late 60s that we had people veering off into this separatism as far as blacks and whites and their attitudes are concerned now. At one time, black and white students, black and white young people were very much into trying to work together. So that I give people an idea of how Jane Fonda, Marlon Brando, people of that nature were all a part of this.
You say that some people wanted money before they'd talk to you for this book.
Yeah, some people in the Panther Party wanted money before they talked.
Do you name any of them?
I don't like to give names mainly because I'm figuring, well, people could possibly engage in some type of legal action, suing for libel or something of that nature.
Are you at all afraid about what you wrote could come back to?
I'm not at all afraid, only because I think that for the most part, most of the people that I'm speaking of, they've moved on in their lives. There's people who are angry about me pointing out the truth about how the Panther Party was about more than just some of the positive things people want to remember them for. There's plenty of people who are angry about that. But I don't think there's people who are out there who are saying, well, we're going to engage in some type of jihad or something against Huey Pearson because he's written a book that points out some of the things we don't want to have pointed out.
Mary Kennedy, who is she?
She was a rank-and-file member of the Black Panther Party.
White or black?
She's black. And that's another thing, like that, now that you mention it, one of the things I think people should also be made aware of is I spend a lot of time in the book talking about rank-and-file party members. Most of the time when people want to remember the Panthers, people who were in the know about that era, they want to remember the leaders only. And what I wanted to do in the book, the only leader I really wanted to focus a lot of attention on was Huey Newton. I wanted to contrast his life with what rank-and-file members went through in the party. So there's an entire segment of the book where I give people the notion of what might have happened. They hear about this Black Panther Party, about this party started by Huey Newton and popularized by Bobby Seale and Eldridge Cleaver. They say, well, hey, I want to join this party. What might it have been like if you are a woman who decides, I want to join this party? Or if you're a man who says, I want to join this party? And Mary Kennedy is one of the people I focus on as an ordinary rank-and-file member that no one would associate with the Black Panther Party in the way you associate Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, or Huey Newton with the Black Panther Party.
Is she still alive?
She's still alive and she lives in East Oakland. At
last count in your book, she has 8 kids or 7? 7 or 8?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think she has 7. I can't remember the exact number at the moment.
But you say that right in the middle of her being a Black Panther and raising these 7 kids, that she caught her husband, who was also a Black Panther, having an affair.
Yeah, she did. What happened was, like, she tried to divorce her husband but get party approval for the divorce. And she ran right smack dab into the middle of the misogyny of the Black Panther Party. I mean, basically, there were a lot of people in leadership positions who basically had a very misogynistic attitude towards women. And they told her, well, your husband doesn't want to get a divorce, so you can't get a divorce. And basically, she was the kind of person who obeyed party policy and said, okay, fine, I can't get a divorce. I'll live with what he's doing. I don't have to like it, but I'll go on and move on in the party. I mean, and the way in which it was done was in a very shocking manner. I mean, using words that I'm not sure I can use on television, and I enlighten readers about a lot of the attitudes that were very, very horrible and very much condoned by people in the leadership of the Black Panther Party. Now, and I want to make it clear that not every single male in the Black Panther Party engaged in this kind of behavior, but the behavior was common enough so that if you believed in treating women in this manner, you know, your behavior practically went unchecked.
Did you ever meet Huey Newton?
No, I didn't, because he died, before I got out there.
Did you ever meet Bobby Seale?
I didn't meet Bobby Seale. I met his brother, and I tried to contact Bobby Seale through his brother, who spoke for the entire family, 3 times and refused to talk about for the book.
Where is this picture from?
The picture, the second picture.
Right down here, where my finger.
The picture is from when Huey Newton and Bobby Seale posed about in 1967. From one of the first places where they located their Black Panther Party headquarters.
Who's Bobby Seale?
Bobby Seale was the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, along with Huey Newton, someone Huey had met in the early 60s when they both were attending junior college. Bobby was very much associated, practically as much associated with the idea and the notion and what the Black Panther Party did as Huey Newton. I'd say that there were 3 people who stand out in the minds of most people when they think of the Black Panther Party: Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and Eldridge Cleaver, and to a lesser extent now David Hilliard and Elaine Brown, because they had autobiographies that came out last year.
David Hilliard had a book last year. Mm-hmm. Now, what's the difference between reading his book and your book? Well,
Hilliard, I think...
And what was his title when he was with the Panthers?
Well, he was, for a long time, he was chief of staff of the Black Panther Party. Well, it's kind of overstating it for a long time, but he was chief of staff for the Black Panther Party in the late 60s, while Huey was in jail, and after Eldridge fled to Algeria, he basically, for a few years, took over running the Black Panther Party. Now, the difference between David's book and my book is that David, he's candid to a certain extent, but he's not totally candid about some of the things that are going on in the party. He's not candid about the criminal activity he was accused of engaging in, like, you know, the embezzlement of party funds, the sanctioning of robberies that occurred.
Was he ever convicted?
He was never convicted. No, this is the kind of activity that I uncovered by talking to people who were actually in the party, and also from going over testimony from people who were in the party
and
getting a number.
Is this a public accusation?
Yeah, public accusation. This was publicly made at congressional and Senate hearings here in Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact. And also people who were in the party who were never accused of being informants for the FBI, because that's another one of the things. Practically, there's a number of different people who are part of the party, who defend the party, who will tell you that anything negative that's connected with the party is because the FBI, sent people in to engage in the activity. And I uncovered plenty of evidence that shows that the FBI sent people in to help a process that was already in action. And I think David Hilliard, there's plenty of evidence that I uncovered talking to ex-Panthers who were never accused of informing, and going over testimony, which shows that Hilliard and people in the leadership were engaging in activities that he doesn't even mention in his book.
This picture here is of a graduation ceremony. Mm-hmm. Where was it?
This was at UC Santa Cruz when Huey Newton was getting his PhD in the history of consciousness.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of people who hold Huey as an icon who are very proud of the fact that he got a PhD, period. And I think that being proud of Huey Newton having the ambition to get a PhD and stick to getting a PhD, I think there's nothing wrong with that. But as far as the content of the program, I think it's very questionable. I think there's plenty of evidence that Huey Newton never really studied very hard to get the PhD. I think that the history of consciousness, that's a very, the title is very nebulous. I think a person has to wonder what on earth is history of consciousness. And his dissertation is not the kind of dissertation that required a lot of study. All he had to do, for the most part, was get his FBI files, go through his FBI files and talk about the history of the FBI trying to persecute him in the Black Panther Party. That passed muster as a dissertation for him to get a PhD, and I don't think that shows any real scholarship.
You have the first picture you have in here is a man named Dellums, mm-hmm. C.L. Dellums. Mm-hmm. Who is he?
C.L. Dellums was one of the principal people who helped found the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Now, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters is very important because I think that it can be pointed to, from the 1920s, it can be pointed to as a principal organization that got the civil rights movement off the ground. A. Philip Randolph was president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, was for the most part after you had Booker T. Washington, and then after Washington, W.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, the next person who became a prominent national black figure was A. Philip Randolph. But he did it. He started the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters with the help of C.L. Dellums, who also eventually became president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. So I talk about Dellums because Dellums was located in Oakland, and he helped A. Philip Randolph start the organization, which was a national organization. But I speak of him because Dellums was a key person that got the movement rolling.
Relationship to Congressman Ron Dellums?
He's his uncle.
Was Ron Dellums ever a Black Panther?
No, he wasn't. He, during the height of the Black Panther Party, Ron Dellums had started his political career. And actually, in the early 70s, he was elected congressman from the Oakland-Berkeley area, and he did have some political dealings with the Black Panther Party. He went into a lot of situations and kind of became a mediator between the Panthers and other people in the Oakland-Berkeley area.
There's a picture in the book here of a gentleman by the name of H. Rap Brown. People my age remember him in 1967. Started a riot right around here in Cambridge, Maryland.
Right. Well, what happened was by that time, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had become very militant, and he had been invited to a town, the town of Cambridge, Maryland, to speak to a group of people in the black community, and he basically gave a speech that condoned the notion that a local school should be burned. So it became a question of, after the school was actually burned, the question became, well, did H. Rap Brown's speech have everything to do with the school being burned down, because the fire department in Cambridge said, well, look, you had this guy come in, give this speech, and the people went and burned down the school. He's the one to blame. We're not going to put out a fire that the people basically decided to engage in on their own. So H. Rap Brown had legal problems from then on out. He had to go underground. He just became involved in a very, very tangled legal web, and eventually faded out of the Black Power movement as a result of.
But you found him. You found him alive today.
Yeah, I found him alive in Atlanta.
Did you see him?
I did see him.
Did you talk to him?
I talked to him.
Where did you find him?
I found him. He's an imam in a mosque in Atlanta, in southwest section of Atlanta. Actually, yes. Well, I guess you could say the western section of Atlanta. A very, very intelligent man who's quietly wants to lead his flock and away from the limelight. And he basically told me that he gave me some pointers as to where I should look to uncover some of the things I wanted to go through, to go and look at in the movement. But he didn't want to talk about the movement because I think that, for one thing, I think there's a lot of bad memories he has about it. He's talked enough about it, and he's basically said what he wanted to say, and he's headed in another direction. I was very impressed with him, to tell you the truth, because he's not a member of the Louis Farrakhan sect of Muslims. He's a genuine member of the Islamic faith. And of course, there's different sects of the Islamic faith, but he struck me as a very a quiet, unassuming man and an intelligent man, as a matter of fact.
Were you ever shocked by what you learned?
Very shocked. I mean, I did not go into writing this book thinking I was going to uncover the shocking things I uncovered. No.
Name a couple.
Some of the murders.
Who was murdered?
People like Fred Bennett, who was a member of the Black Panther Party. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why he was murdered. Some people say that the Panthers thought he was an informant and murdered him. Other people say that he got the wife of a major leader in the party pregnant and was murdered as a result of that.
Where was he murdered?
He was murdered in the Santa Cruz Mountains, outside of Santa Cruz, California.
When?
It was about in 1971, if I remember correctly, the beginning of 71. Have
they ever caught the person that...
No, they didn't. I mean, there was a person who was working with, as an undercover agent, who helped dispose of the body. He's not the person who actually planned the murder and engaged in the murder. But while he was working undercover in the Black Panther Party, in order that he not be found out as an undercover agent, he did go along with helping to dispose the body.
What else shocked you?
Another murder that shocked me, that there's a lot of speculation on, is the murder of Betty Van Patter. Now, there's a lot of murkiness surrounding
Betty Van Patter.
Betty Van Patter, a woman, who became a bookkeeper for a little while for the Black Panther Party. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not the party killed her, and the people that I talked to, there's convincing evidence that she was killed by the party. but there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, largely to do with the fact that Betty Van Patter is white, and there's a lot of people who are angry that murder is focused on as a possible Black Panther murder, because they say, well, you know, why focus on this white person who the Panther Party is being accused of murdering, and not focus on all the blacks who were accused of the Panther Party was accused of murdering. So I can kind of understand that, but at the same time, I think that the number of innocent people, like a woman like Betty Van Patter, or even Fred Bennett, or anybody who was killed by the party or accused of being killed by the party, I think I think that's something that stands out in my mind as something that the party is something that shows the party should not be seen purely as a revolutionary do-good organization. And I just think that those two murders and some other murders, murders that I didn't even uncover, that you know, rumors about murders, and those are the types of things that the rumors as well as the hard evidence is so strong that the party should not be seen as purely the revolutionary vanguard that a lot of people on the left and in the liberal community want to see it as.
Gangsta rap.
I think gangsta rap very much grows out of the image of the Black Panther Party created for young black men. This image of defiant posturing that stands out in particular with Huey Newton sitting on the throne, gun in one hand and spear in the other. And also with what Eldridge Cleaver was doing. Eldridge Cleaver engaged. Who was he? Eldridge Cleaver was for a time, he was basically the leader of the Black Panther Party while Huey Newton was in jail. He was the Minister of Information, and he, in about 1968, when Huey Newton was sitting in jail waiting to go on trial for the murder of an Oakland police officer, Cleaver, for the most part, became the mouthpiece for the party, and also Bobby Seale. But Cleaver was a person whose initial fame came from writing a book called Soul on Ice. Soul on Ice was a book that was probably the first really outrageous book about young black men who were seen as what I would say are the noble savage mentality, the noble savage image that I think young black men still suffer from. Cleaver talked about raping women. He said, well, at first he raped black women, and then he crossed the tracks, so to speak, and started raping white women. He basically, in the book, kind of gave a lot of rationales for why a young black man in a poor community can turn into a criminal. And he was basically, you had a lot of people, a lot of critics who were fascinated with what he said because he could write very well. I mean, the things he was saying were very disturbing and outrageous, and he started making speeches after he became a Black Panther that would basically condone killing judges and things if you go to court and the verdict didn't come out the way you want it. Didn't the conservatives endorse him a few years ago? Well, after he came back, he fled to Algeria. He fled to Algeria and came back to the United States. He was in Algeria and France for a while, and he came back to the United States in 1975. And he professed that he was a new person. He renounced his Black Panther days. He renounced his radical philosophy altogether. And he became part of Reverend Sun Myung Moon's church. He became a conservative for a while. So yeah, the conservatives supported him. Now, I didn't engage in a lot of research of all that Eldridge Cleaver engaged in after he came back in 1975 up to, like, say, today. But yeah, he did become a conservative for a while. And he's been involved in some minor criminal activity in the last few years as well. Did you talk to him? No, I didn't talk to him. The reason I didn't talk to him is because of what I said a little bit earlier. I wanted to look at Newton and contrast Newton with the people who were in the rank and file, because I think that a lot of I did want to talk to Seale and couldn't get to Seale, but I think that one of the reasons is because I did want to concentrate on what the rank and file members of the party did, and the other reason was because I thought that the notion that the people who were in the leaders of the party were going to be very candid about the party was something that I didn't agree with. I thought that all people who are in positions of prominence, for the most part, or I should say most people who are in the positions of prominence, for the most part, have an interest in protecting their image. So I felt in writing the book, I wanted to talk to the people who were the foot soldiers of the party, because it became quite clear to me after beginning my research that there was an entire side of the story about the Black Panther Party, the rank and file members and what they went through, that was the gist of what the party was all about. What you saw with Huey Newton, what you saw with Bobby Seale, what you saw with Eldridge Cleaver was a very small part of what the Black Panther phenomenon was all about. If they were all public relations people, they were not the foot soldiers. You make some connections in the back of the book
former L.A. gang member Cody Scott, who earned the moniker Monster Cody from L.A. police after he brutally beat a man to death, describes in his memoir, Monster, the autobiography of an L.A. gang member, the senseless murders of other blacks, which he also engaged in as a member of L.A.'s 8 Trey Crips.
Right.
All right. But you go on, though, you say white journalist William Broyles, I think he's former editor of Newsweek, who facilitated the publication of Scott's book, is analogous to journalist Bob Seale, who in 1966 was a facilitator of Eldridge Cleaver's career. Do you give the Broyles Seale team good marks or bad marks for facilitating the careers of these two men?
I give them bad marks, because I think there's a real element in this society. I hate to use labels, but I would say leftist, liberal element in American society that has this notion that that true blacks are blacks who are basically kind of I'll just be blunt about it, uncivilized, and that they think of people like Monster Cody, they think of people like the Eldridge Cleaver from Soul on Ice as being the true black people, and that when these people write books about how they engage in their pathological behavior, they really think they're seeing the true black person, and they raw and unfiltered. So I think that Bob Seale very much played into that image. Now, I can't speak for the Bob Seale who exists today, but Bob Seale from that era very much played into that, because it was a very popular thing to play into. This notion of, okay, my God, I mean, what is blackness all about? And the idea, well, blackness is all about this pathology that we in white America are largely responsible for. So I think that this thing that Eldridge Cleaver promoted in his book Soul on Ice and was kind of brought to the surface by a Bob Seale is carried over into the leftist liberal philosophy about black people in general. And William Broyles picked it up and brought it on in with Monster Cody and this whole idea of, okay, what is this monster that we see in South Central LA? I mean, what is he all about? Let's examine his behavior. And it carries over into movies like Menace to Society. This idea of the blacks not being responsible, the blacks at the bottom having no real responsibility for where they are, society having created this monster, and let's examine this monster and try to figure out what makes this monster tick. So that's what I'm referring to when I make the Seale-Broyles connection.
How old are you?
I'm 36. I'll be 37 next month.
Are you where you wanted to be in your life at this point?
At this point, yeah, I'm very much where I want to be. I've taken a lot of risks, stuck to my guns to take the risks, and basically hit bottom as far as the things that a person needs to do to as a struggling writer, and have come back up, and I'm very much satisfied with what I've accomplished.
Where do you write?
I write at my place in New York City. I live in the Chelsea district in New York City.
Do you have a family?
Just my personal family? No, I'm a single man. A single man who's happily dating a particular woman.
When you write, what time of day do you do it?
Most of the time I like to write anywhere from 11 o'clock at night to about 5, 6 in the morning, because I can hear myself think. There's New York's a very busy city. I love Manhattan. I'm very fascinated with Manhattan. And the noise really dies down, anywhere from 11 to 5. I can go out in the day and go into practically any community and be fascinated, and then at night I can hear myself think or read or work at my word processing program on my Macintosh, and I really like to work that time of the early morning.
How much do you write a night?
Well, when I'm really going good, I might spend like 5 or 6 hours working on a piece. I like to write every day. Lately, I've been so busy doing a variety of different things. I haven't been writing every single day. I've been catching up on a lot of my reading in preparation for other projects I want to engage in. But I would say, for the most part, I try to get 5, 6 hours worth of writing done, at least 5, 6 days a week.
Who owns the Pacific News Service?
Who owns? That's an interesting question. The Pacific News Service is a consortium of writers and scholars from around the country. Sandy Close is executive editor of Pacific News Service. It puts out about 1 story per day. I guess a better way to say it is it puts out about 6 stories per week in a packet that goes out to subscribers. But also we have subscribing newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle, the Baltimore Sun, the Chicago Tribune, and they pick up stories the same way they would an Associated Press story.
What's your dream job?
My dream job would be, I'd say, as an independent author who, for some time, maybe for a few years, would be connected with a major newspaper, writing commentaries. But ultimately, say when I'm 50 years old, a person who's written in fiction, nonfiction, maybe a couple of plays. Ultimately, that's what I'd like to do. What
would you describe your politics as being today?
No, that's a very good question, because I see myself independent, probably.
Left or right?
I really am reluctant to go to either side. I kind of like to take each issue as they come. One of the things that I'm amazing myself with is the fact that I think a lot of people who are branded as conservatives are, I think it's worth the while of a lot of folks to really listen to what they're saying. I think that a lot of conservatives are too easily written off as racist, and I think that a lot of people in the left liberal community can be every bit as racist as anybody who's identified as conservative. And a lot of times conservatives, I think, espouse philosophies that are more respecting of black people and the potential of black people than people who are seen as liberal or leftist. And in writing a lot of the stuff I've written, I've been accused by a lot of people of being a neoconservative, conservative, one of the black conservatives. But I reject that notion only because I just don't like labels, because I think once you accept a particular type of label, then if an issue comes down the pike, you say, okay, well, this is the label I'm under which I write, so let me figure out what I'm supposed to say per that label, and I don't like to do that. I do like to just get rid of all labels and examine what's being said. And I think, and again, I want to emphasize that I think that a lot of people branded as conservatives, i.e. racist, by people on the left liberal community, are not really racist. I think that they are engaging in a real effort to figure out a way to solve some of our problems, and they just believe that you can't do it through the government.
You say you grew up with a handicap, the name Huey.
Oh, I hated it when I was growing up. Oh, I was picked on for that name incessantly.
What's wrong with it?
I just never liked it. I think it sounds funny. I never liked it. And Huey Newton was the first person I ever knew who was seen as a hero with that name, because it was connected with a cartoon character that I didn't really like. And I just decided, well, I just I didn't want much to do with the name. So that's why I don't even use it.
Well, here's what the book looks like, and on the book you show Huey Pearson. So
right.
Do people call you Hugh now?
Oh yeah.
The Shadow of the Panther. It's a book about the civil rights movement, Huey Newton, his death, and black power in this country in the last 30, 40 years. Thank you for joining us, Huey Pearson.
Thank you for having me. Came this icon that everybody looked up to, and when he came out of jail on a technicality in 1970, because he had been convicted of manslaughter, when he came out of jail, he was a person that was celebrated by radicals everywhere. I mean, it was the thing to have your anti-war button on the one hand, Free Huey button on the other, or if you were black, a young black person, your Black Power button, and along with that, your Free Huey button. So Huey came out of that and came into a celebrity world of limousine liberals, of Hollywood liberals who kind of latched on to him. But at the same time, he developed a very heavy drug addiction. Now, he had always been, he had been a petty criminal, and by petty criminal I mean a person who engaged in short change scams in Oakland. He had done that while he was in high school and on up into his early 20s. But then when he came out, and became a person who was an icon of the beautiful people, he became heavily addicted to cocaine. He had tried drugs before, but he did not become addicted anywhere near to the extent he became addicted in 1970 when he came out of prison. And he became a virtual monster in a lot of ways. I mean, he just, the side of Huey Newton that could engage in evil activity, it just accelerated, because cocaine makes a person very paranoid. He engaged in a lot of sexual abuse. He engaged in the ordering the murder of people within the party, and in the cases of some people outside the party.
Just let me interrupt to ask you, how do you know all this?
Because out of talking to people who were actually in the party, and out of going over court records and uncovering the evidence that he actually engaged in this. There's plenty of evidence around that Huey Newton did. He was accused and charged with plenty of killings, and accused and charged with embezzling money from a school that the Panthers, the Black Panthers had.
How many times was he convicted of something?
He was convicted. Okay, he was convicted in 1967. He was convicted as well of stabbing Odell Lee in 1964. This was a misdemeanor conviction. He was convicted of a very minor charge in about 1987, 88. So he was convicted of something probably about 3-4 times. So he was charged with a number of different things. And
did he go to jail every time?
No, he didn't go to jail every time. He was out on bail for long periods of time. When he came out of jail in 1970 on the manslaughter conviction and shooting the Oakland police officer, and he was tried 2 times over again, and the trials resulted in hung jury, so the case was dismissed.
Go back to the August 22nd, 1989.
Okay, August 22nd, 1989, Huey Newton had come out of jail on a misdemeanor charge, drug possession charge. By this time, we're talking about a man who's very much addicted to cocaine. His organization no longer exists. You know, the Black Panthers were practically defunct by 1982. And he's heavily addicted to crack cocaine. So he goes to West Oakland, and on this particular night that you're speaking of, and he tries to get some more cocaine, because what he's doing is he's not paying for the crack cocaine the way most customers pay. And he's pressuring drug dealers to give him drugs, because, you know, I'm Huey Newton's basically his whole thing is like, I'm Huey Newton. I used to be king of the streets. You have to pay respect to me because of who I am. So drug dealers are giving him money, but it's a very complex thing. There's organizations who are running drugs on the streets of Oakland, and one organization is the Black Guerrilla Family, which is prison-based. Now, there are Black Panthers who became part of the Black Guerrilla Family while they were in prison, because there are a number of people who were in the Black Panther Party who ended up going to prison. Huey Newton, there's a lot of anger against Huey Newton because of him abandoning these Panthers while they were in prison, and no longer allowing the Panther Party to take care of them and their families to the extent that they did before he got out of prison in 1970. So you have a lot of residual anger in the BGF resulting from that, as well as the fact that he's taking drugs from. I didn't write that, but his mother was a Black Panther. I think I did refer to her in the book. Yeah, I referred to her because she was in the New York chapter of the Black Panthers. So yeah, he is one of the young people who speaks of the Black Panthers almost as icons. So yeah, she was in the party, but I don't spend much attention on her. I just spend like a sentence or two on her.
Where was Huey Newton from?
He was from Oakland, California. His family originally came from Monroe, Louisiana. He was named after Huey Long because, as a lot of people who know anything about Southern politics and Louisiana politics know, Long was a very popular populist governor who was very different from most of the Southern governors of the 1920s and 30s. I mean, he was a governor and then a senator. Most of the Southern politicians in that era engaged in race-baiting politics. And though a case can easily be made that Huey Long was a racist, he did not engage in race-baiting politics. He was very populist in his nature, and he had the whole notion of every man a king. So a lot of blacks in Louisiana had a respect for that, and Huey Newton's father, Walter Newton, out of respect for what Long was trying to accomplish for all poor people in Louisiana, decided to name his son Huey as well. You know, so that's how Huey got his name.
Right on the flap, opening flap of this book, you talk about August 22nd, 1989. Mm-hmm. What happened?
August 22nd, 1989 was the day that Huey Newton approached. He went to West Oakland. He'd grown up all over Oakland, and by this time we're talking about a Newton who he'd been in jail. He had come out of jail for a shooting of a police officer in Oakland. And it was while he was in jail that the Black Panther Party became the national party that everybody remembers, because he professed that he did not kill this officer. And we have to understand that this is 1967, the fall of 1967. You had a number of different groups who saw the police as their enemies. You had the anti-war, young whites and anti-war movement, and you had young blacks, young black militants, both of whom said, well, the police are our enemy. And they kind of latched on to Huey Newton as a hero for being accused of shooting this police officer. So Huey Newton became these guys without paying. So a contract was put out on the life of Huey Newton. And on this particular August night, a young man decides Tyrone Robinson decides to take up the contract because he thinks he's going to move up in the organization. And on that night, he puts 3 bullets in the head of Huey Newton, and Huey Newton dies.
How do you know that Tyrone Robinson did it?
Well, he was charged with the killing. He was convicted of second-degree murder. I went to the trial. I interviewed Willie Payne, who was actually with Huey Newton before he died. As a matter of fact, Huey Newton crossed paths with Willie Payne the night that he died, and decided to get the cocaine and come back to Willie Payne's apartment and smoke the cocaine. I mean, yeah, the crack cocaine. Did you talk to Tyrone Robinson? I didn't. I tried to talk to Tyrone Robinson, but I didn't get a chance to talk to Tyrone Robinson. All I did was hear his testimony and also go in court and also go through the court records. And because there's a lot of, there were different police reports and everything that as well as what I could glean from Willie Payne to reconstruct everything. Did you go to the funeral of Huey Newton? I didn't go to the funeral of Huey Newton because I came to Oakland. Let's see, he died in August, and I came to the Bay Area in November. So I didn't get a chance to go to the funeral. What was your reason for going to the Bay Area? I came to the Bay Area because I had a tentative offer from Robert Maynard, who publisher of the Oakland Tribune, to write for the Oakland Tribune. I say tentative only because he said, well, as soon as I can open something up, I'd like to have you on my staff. So I was freelancing in New York City. I didn't have anything solid in New York City because everyone was telling me at the major papers, well, you have to pay your dues. You have to go out and leave New York and come and work your way back. So I thought Bob Maynard's tentative offer was the best offer that I had, so I decided to come to the Bay Area and wing it, go out to the Bay Area. And at the same time, the Panthers, since my birth name is Huey, the Panthers had kind of left my mind from my childhood, because in my childhood I had read everything, practically everything I could get my hands on about the Panthers. So when Huey was killed in August, I was like, well, my goodness, what happened to this guy? What happened to the Black Panther Party? I want to investigate what happened to the Black Panther Party, as well as pursue this newspaper opportunity in the Bay Area. So that's what brought me to the Bay Area. Did you ever think at any time in your life, Huey Pearson, what is the origin of the title of your book, The Shadow of the Panther? It originates out of my determination to find a good title to catch the attention of publishing houses when I came with the proposal. And also, well, that's one part. The other part is I wanted to explain, the nature of what I wanted to do. It was like the shadow of the Panther. What kind of legacy did the Black Panther Party leave America with in general, and Black America with in particular? And I thought that it would be a good title to use to convey what I was trying to say about the Black Panther Party. So that picture on the cover is of Huey Newton, and the subtitle here is Huey Newton and the Price of Black Power in America. Who was Huey Newton? Huey Newton. Huey Newton was he's called the co-founder, but was actually the founder and driving force behind the Black Panther Party. He founded the party in the fall of 1966. He and Bobby Seale actually founded the party, but Bobby Seale was more public relations, a person along with Eldridge Cleaver. And Newton was really the driving force, the real power behind everything. I think that the Black Panther Party is an organization that, without question, it got its start kind of coming out of what had been started by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So I think the Huey Newton is definitely a person who had two sides, as I point out in the book. The one side of him was criminal, kind of, very criminal from the very beginning, petty criminal, and then it became much more serious later on. But the other side was he was an intellectual, something that I think you don't see, a combination you don't see too often in African-American men anymore. It would almost be like Tupac Shakur, a person who was in the news for a while, as engaging in all sorts of outrageous activities along with his rap. Someone like Tupac who could quote the philosophers and writers from all over the world, and also speak English properly. Huey Newton was very much a person like that, but who at the same time could go down on the streets and get in a fight and beat up anybody that practically anyone he could come across, or engage in criminality with anyone he came across. Did you write that Tupac Shakur's mother was a Black Panther?